Heroes are boring. It's true. You can look at almost any movie, book, or story, and it's pretty obvious that at their core, heroes are as bland as cauliflower with your steak dinner. Sure, I mean, some of the things that they do can be exciting, but I'm talking about who they are, not what they are usually forced into doing. And it's not their fault, because heroes are simply reactionary creatures. They are simply reacting to what the villain in the story, the truly interesting character, is doing. I've talked about this here before on the channel, that heroes are reactionary and villains are actionary. Villains are what drive the story and the plot forward. Harry Potter is an incredibly boring person as a character. But because Voldemort, the actionary villain, is forcing Harry to fight and survive, he's pulled from what certainly would have been a rather boring and bland life into the role of a hero. The hard truth for most of our favorite heroes is that without criminals and villains, the worlds that they would exist in would resemble the boring monotony akin to Stepford Wives. But villains are interesting. Without a villain, you don't have a story. Without villains, the story of Batman would just read, a young billionaire Bruce Wayne went to the theater with his parents, and then he grew up to be a businessman. The end. Not exactly the most appealing story. And oftentimes in Dungeons and Dragons and role-playing games like Starfinder, we as Dungeon Masters focus too much on the action of RPCs, what the boring heroes are doing. I mean, it kind of makes sense. Our players have these great characters and we need to fill a few hours a week of random stuff for them to do with them, so we create haphazard dungeons for them to crawl through and random monsters to ambush them out on the road, which, I mean, it's fine, it works, and I'm certainly not here to say that if you enjoy those beer and pretzel types of games that your fun is wrong. But if you're struggling with really hooking your players into your stories and your plots, and you find them often drifting left and right to cling to that random throwaway NPC without solid direction, as we all kind of joke about them doing far too often, it's because your villain sucks. And in my experience, even with my own writing and my game prep, when your villains feel flat and generic, it's because you don't actually have good motivations for them. And I mean more than they want this magic stone so they can come back to life types of motivations, because that's not a motivation. That's a goal. And there is a huge difference between a character's motivations and their goals. I'm talking about truly understanding the one or two things that is driving them forward before we even get to their goals and the things that they'll do to satisfy their actual motivation. So let's look at the two big goals for a typical character: wealth and power. Now, most of your villains will at their core be chasing either wealth or power in some form or another. Maybe they want an ancient artifact to use, that's power. Or maybe they want an ancient artifact to sell. Of course, that's wealth. Maybe they want to raise an army of undead. Power. Are they a gang leader who has taken over a small mining town? Maybe that's both wealth and power. Almost any goal a villain can have in your game can usually be broken down into one of these two categories, if not both of them. And this is a great place to actually start as a dungeon master if you are building out a new campaign villain. You may not have a 5-page background on your villain with an intricately detailed history, but you do know that you want your campaign to include a necromancer raising an undead army. I mean, that is totally fine. Starting with a goal before digging into motivations is much more common than the reverse. But if you stop here, you're going to have a much more difficult time developing this villain in your game and story for your players to love to hate, and they most likely won't have much attachment to them in your campaign story arc. Let's face it, the necromancer raising an undead army isn't exactly the freshest idea, but that doesn't mean that we can't make him into a memorable campaign villain that your players will talk about for years to come. What we need to do is look at his true motivation. Why is he raising an army? In order to do that, we need to go back one step to look at his or her main villainous flaw. While this isn't the only method to break down flaws, I actually find it easier to think of them by using the 7 deadly sins, or in our case, the 6 deadly sins. But before I talk about that, it is sponsor time. Huge shout out to my sponsor for today's video, Q Workshop. Guys, Q Workshop makes, in my opinion, the single coolest dice on the planet. These guys don't make boring, generic color swirl dice. They make so much more than that. They have an entire lineup of unique elven dice, dwarven dice, dice for individual game systems like Starfinder and Call of Cthulhu. They have glow-in-the-dark dice, metal dice, and on and on. Christmas is basically here, and right now Q Workshop has decided to hook up all of you guys with your very own coupon code for a whopping 20% off by entering Taking 20% sign at checkout. But this discount, guys, is only good through November, so please be sure to use them while you can. I've thrown a link down to their site where you guys can go and check out their amazing dice sets for yourself down in the description box below. So thank you, Q Workshop, for being a part of the Taking 20 team and for the killer discount. We appreciate it. So after scratching Sloth from that list, as that may not be terribly great for our Dungeons & Dragons villains, we're left with avarice, greed, lust, gluttony, pride, and wrath. Just like our goals of power and wealth, almost all of our villains should be able to break down into one of these villainous flaws, if not several of them. Does our extravagant thief lust after a beautiful noble that is above their station? So they wish to build their wealth and power in secret with devious means to impress her and her father. Does our bugbear gang leader have a simple gluttony for violence and torture as he looks to raid merchant caravans traveling out on the road, naturally building his wealth and influence in his territory? And does the wrath of our necromancer seeking revenge, or in his eyes, justice, pull him forward with his dark plans, or is it perhaps his envy of the people's lives who have never known suffering like his that he wishes to correct? Maybe it's all of these things and more, with multiple deadly sins layering on top of each other for each of our villains. But by looking beyond just our villain's goals of gaining powers by his means to achieve that goal of raising an undead army, we are now starting to create a more interesting villain than simply another generic necromancer, blah, 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 for our players to go out and stab to death until he is no longer a threat. We know more about our villain and how they'll react to their first loss at the PC's hands. We can understand how they'll adapt their plans to the growing threat from the players, and we can create a more complex story around them instead of just thinking about how we are going to railroad our players with static villain goals, which is terrible. This is an issue that newer Dungeon Masters kind of sort of run into a little bit more by thinking that the players will encounter our villain here and defeat his minions, then they'll talk to this NPC to find out about this, then we'll have the players fight the necromancer here again, and finally we'll have a big showdown here to end the campaign. If you truly understand your villain, you'll instead be able to look at how they'll adapt and change their course of action after encountering the PCs for the first time. But we need to go one more layer back to truly create a complex villain that won't feel static and predictable to our players. We need to look at the one singular, most powerful motivator for man: fear. Fear is the most powerful motivator known to man, period. And it isn't even close. Everything you do is motivated by fear. Everything. Let me give you an example to show you how powerful fear is. And this example, by the way, is incredibly fitting as we're just a few weeks away from Black Friday shopping right here in the US. In 2014, for the entire month of November, the Microsoft Xbox One was available from Amazon, Walmart, Target, Best Buy, and Newegg for $349.99. The entire month. Anyone looking to grab a new Xbox for Christmas could have easily gotten their hands on one for that price for almost a full month. What time do you think that all those stores opened up for Black Friday that year? That's right, 6 p.m. on Thanksgiving Day, one of the biggest holidays of the year, and instead of spending time with their family, thousands of people sat in lines across the country, camped out for 12 hours to be one of the first in line to get their hands on a still relatively new Xbox One for the reduced Black Friday special. Do you know how much the Xbox One was on sale for that year? $329.99. That's right. People gave up their entire holiday with their family to stand in line for 12 hours to save $20. Ironically, if those same people had simply worked 12 hours at the minimum wage at that time of $7.25, they would have earned $87, not counting holiday pay or if they made anything more than the absolute minimum wage. Why? Why would they act in such a ridiculous way to save $20? Fear. They were so overcome with fear that they might miss out on the sale that they gave up their entire holiday with their family. It was that fear that drove their action, because fear is man's greatest single motivator. Why did Bilbo Baggins leave the Shire to go chasing after the dwarves with his signed contract? Because he feared missing out on the experience. It's the same reason that Kickstarters, guys, do so well, because people fear that they are going to miss out. You go to work because you fear being homeless. You comb your hair because you fear what other people might say or think about you. You go to college because you fear trying to find a good job without a degree. You brush your teeth because you fear losing them, and on and on. So now, with this knowledge, we can start to go back and apply this thinking to our villains, NPCs, and even PCs. Instead of thinking about what a villain might do, the actions they might take that qualifies them as a villain, now we can look and say, what fears does this character have that might drive them to goals and means of achieving those goals that qualifies them as a villain? Our villainous thief lusts after the noble woman because he fears a life where she weds another man and his life without her. His goals of gaining wealth and influence are accompanied with means to achieve those goals that would obviously make him a villain. Our drow priestess's wrath caused by her fears of failing Lolth and what that means for her house. Understanding this will tell us as Dungeon Masters much more about her. When and if she'll flee a fight, for instance. How she'll react to allowing the PCs to escape after her initial encounter with them. Her pride might dictate the means of her planned second encounter, and so on. Our band of gnolls fear their eternal hunger and what would happen if it goes unsated, or maybe the leader's pride gives him fear of being just another servant in Yeenagu's eyes. Knowing the difference will tell us what types of goals our gnoll leader might have. Do his minions fear death at the hands of the PCs more, or do they fear facing their leader having failed him more? That kind of thought process will tell us when and how fast they might concede a losing fight and flee. Anakin Skywalker feared for Padme, and it was his fear that caused him to become Darth Vader. Lord Voldemort's pride caused him to fear a world where he wasn't recognized as the greatest wizard of all time. So he saw a goal of power through villainous means. And the Joker, he fears a boring and monotonous life, clocking into a Monday through Friday 8 to 5er. So his gluttony for causing pain and suffering to simply entertain himself leads him to the life of a villain. So what does this mean for your actual game prep? Do you need to stop and think about every villain motivation for every encounter? No, that's not something at all that I would recommend. It's not going to improve your game prep. It's going to slow it way down. However, I would absolutely recommend doing this for any significant villain in your game. Anytime you have a villain who you are planning world-changing actions for outside of what the characters see, or if you have maybe a reoccurring villain, those are usually good times to stop and take a look at their fears, flaws, goals, and means. And as an added note, guys, it's perfectly okay to do this afterwards with throwaway villains if your players suddenly take an unexpected interest in them, or if they escape to become a reoccurring villain. So to help with this, I've built a quick and simple form-fillable PDF sheet that I've made available on DriveThruRPG as a pay whatever the hell you want, alongside my other products. So you guys can head over there. I'll throw a link down in the description box below. Grab yourself a copy and use this for your main campaign villains, and hopefully it will get you thinking about them as a more complex character than the generic evil necromancer raising an undead horde. So now I want to pass it over to you guys in the community here. What kinds of prep do you put into your villains? Is it a lot? Is it a little? Do you have your own system maybe for adding depth to your villain, or do you just kind of wing it as you go? What changes do you make when you feel like your villain isn't getting the emotional reaction from the players that you had hoped for? And finally, what is the coolest villain that you've ever created for your game or campaign? As you guys can see, I've got some scruff going on here for No Shave November right now. And look, guys, I just want to remind you guys and gals to man up and woman up and to go get your prostate and breast checked out and schedule a checkup if you haven't had one in a while. Cancer, it sucks. And by detecting anything out of the ordinary as soon as possible, you can increase your odds of survival immensely. And please, please be sure to tell your loved ones to do the same. I want to give a huge shout out and massive thank you to all of the amazing kick-ass patrons over at WelcomeAdventures.com who support this channel and support my goals of chasing this so I can make more content here. Guys, simply put, because of you, I can keep doing this. Without Patreon, this wouldn't happen. So I'm really, really grateful. If you guys like this video, you guys enjoy my channel, you want to support the channel in an easy way and grab some rewards for yourself, WelcomeAdventures.com is a great place to do that. So I would, head over there or something. I don't know. Do that. If this is your first time here and you love role-playing games as much as I do, I'd love to have you subscribe. Every week I put out new videos on GM tips, player tips, tutorials, and more. So if that sounds like something you might be interested in, just hit that subscribe button down below and come join us. Thank you guys so much for watching. My name is Cody, and may your games be filled with awesome memories and even better friends. I'll catch you guys next time.
Yeah.